Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. You know we love to go deep on those books that promise to change the way we work and live, and, well, today's pick might just do that. We're diving into Dr. Mithu Storoni's Hyperefficient, Mastering Your Mind's Potential. I'm so excited to really break it down, explore the key insights, and hopefully walk away with some practical stuff we can all actually apply to our own lives, right?
Absolutely. And it's such a relevant book for, well, anyone who feels that pressure to do more, be more, achieve more, which I think is pretty much all of us these days.
It really is. And, one of the things that struck me right off the bat was how hyper-efficient doesn't just jump into the latest productivity hacks or, some crazy time management system. Instead, it starts by taking us way back, like way, way back to our ancestors,
Yeah.
how they lived and worked.
Fascinating, right?
Yeah. Turns out they worked in these really intense bursts, followed by periods of rest. If you
Yeah.
think about hunting, gathering, you can't be on all the time. And Dr. Storoni actually links this to our modern struggle with burnout.
Yeah, she argues that we've kind of adopted this assembly line mentality for our brains, expecting them to just churn out a constant level of focus and output like machines. But that's just not how our brains evolved to work.
So forcing it, is that what leads to the stress, the exhaustion, all those things that ultimately sabotage our productivity?
Exactly. And that's really the core message of hyper efficient. Instead of fighting our natural rhythms, we need to work with them. And one of the tools she gives us for doing that is her gear model.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for us. What is this gear model all about?
Well, think about it this way. Our mental activity actually operates in three distinct gears, each one ideal for a specific type of task.
So like a car.
Yeah, exactly. So gear one, think of that as your relaxed, daydreamy state. It's perfect for letting your mind wander, making those unexpected connections, often where creativity really sparks.
Makes sense. And gear two?
That's your focused work mode, right? Like laser sharp concentration, zeroed in on a specific task. And then there's gear three, which, well, none of us really love. That's our emergency response mode. Think fight or flight. That kicks in when we're under pressure or, feeling totally overwhelmed.
Ah, so that's where the burnout comes in. I think a lot of us default to that gear two grind, assuming that's the only way to get things done. And then boom, we're stuck in gear three before we even realize it.
It's a trap for sure. But hyper-efficient is all about recognizing that each gear has its purpose. Constantly pushing for gear two, well, that's a recipe for burnout. We need to be more aware of what gear we're in and then intentionally shift gears throughout the day to match the task, right?
Okay, love the theory, but let's get practical here. Give us some real-world examples. How would someone actually apply this gear model to their day-to-day?
Sure, let's say you're wrestling with a problem that needs, some creative thinking, outside the box solutions. Instead of forcing yourself into gear two, staring at that screen, try taking a walk or doing something else that lets your mind wander, be in that gear one space. You might be surprised at what solutions pop up when you give your brain that space to breathe.
Oh, I totally get that. I used to think daydreaming was a waste of time, like I was being unproductive. But now I realize those moments of, I don't know what to call it, like diffuse thinking, they're crucial. Just the other day, I was walking my dog, and bam, a solution to a work problem hit me out of nowhere. It's like those insights need that mental breathing room to even exist.
Precisely. And then on the flip side, when you need that deep focus for tasks like, I don't know, writing or analyzing data, that's when you intentionally shift into gear two. Find a quiet spot, get rid of those distractions, and set yourself up for success in that laser-focused mode.
This all makes so much sense. But there's another piece to this whole hyper-efficiency puzzle, right? It's not just about the gears, it's also about working with our natural rhythms. I'm talking about things like our circadian rhythms, those natural peaks and dips in energy we all have.
You're totally on the right track. Our bodies aren't machines. We're not meant to operate at the same level all day long. We have these ebbs and flows of energy, and ignoring them, well, it's like trying to swim upstream.
Okay, so how do we start swimming with the current, so to speak? How do we harness those rhythms?
It starts with paying attention to your own energy patterns, right? When do you feel most alert, most focused? When do you naturally hit those dips? Maybe you're a morning person, you thrive on those complex tasks before noon. Or maybe you hit your stride later in the day. The key is understanding your own rhythm and then, well, structuring your workday to fit that. Schedule those demanding tasks for your peak energy windows and save the less intense stuff for those dips.
Okay, I can definitely get behind that. I'm a morning person all the way, so I'll be trying that for sure. But what about those times when, even during a peak energy window, we hit a wall? I'm talking about that mental fatigue, that feeling of being drained. How do we deal with that?
Well, that's where those strategic breaks come in. And it's one of those, I don't know, aha moments that hyper-efficient really highlights. You might think, just push through, power through, that's the way to get stuff done. But taking those short breaks, it actually boosts your productivity in the long run.
I struggle with that sometimes, like feeling guilty stepping away from my desk. But I do always come back feeling more, I don't know, refreshed, focused, like I can actually think again. Is there like science behind that?
Absolutely. There's a concept called micro-restoration. Even just a few minutes of what Dr. Storoni calls neutral activity can reset your brain, prevent that fatigue from setting in. Think of it like, I don't know, hitting the refresh button on your mental computer, right?
So what are some examples of these neutral breaks? Are we talking about like staring blankly into space?
Not quite. It's more about activities that don't require, a ton of mental effort. Things that let your mind disengage from work. Closing your eyes, focusing on your breath, that's a great one. Quick walk, maybe some stretches, even a simple puzzle can be really effective. Just give your brain a chance to kind of shift gears, come back recharged.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got the gear model, working with our natural energy rhythms and these strategic breaks. What else do we need to unlock this whole hyper-efficient state? Because there's a whole other beast we haven't even talked about, the digital world, right? Constant notifications, overflowing inboxes. It can feel impossible to apply any of this when we're just bombarded with information all the time. Where do we even begin to manage that?
It's a great point, and you're so right. The digital world throws a whole new set of challenges at us, but hyper-efficient tackles that head on. There are some really practical strategies in the book for reclaiming our mental bandwidth, even in this like hyper-connected age. And I think it starts with recognizing that, not all information is created equal. We need to get much better at filtering, being ruthless about what truly deserves our attention.
So becoming better at discerning what really matters, what deserves our energy. That sounds,
Great.
well, easier said than done, right?
It is, but it's a skill you can develop. One of the first steps is just becoming aware of how much technology is dictating our attention. Like, how often are you checking email? Is it, a constant stream of interruptions all day, or do you have specific times set aside for it?
Okay, yeah, that hits home.
Yeah.
I'm definitely guilty of the constant inbox checking. I'm curious to hear what Dr. Storoni recommends for taming that beast. Maybe we can dive into those strategies after a quick, oh wait, no breaks, right?
Okay.
So let's keep going. What else does she suggest?
One of the most powerful things, and it might sound counterintuitive, is scheduling disconnect time. Like
Hmm.
actually unplugging from the digital world. No email, no social media, no news feeds, just, pure uninterrupted time for yourself, for deep work.
I have to admit, that sounds a little, I don't know, scary almost. Like
Yeah.
in today's world, we're expected to be reachable 24/7. How realistic is it to truly disconnect?
It's a challenge, for sure. But even small steps in that direction can make a difference. Start with setting boundaries around your, digital consumption. Maybe it's turning off notifications for those non-essential apps or, setting those specific times for checking email instead of just being bombarded all day. Remember, you're the one in control of the technology, not the other way around.
Right. That's a good reminder. It's so easy to fall into that trap of feeling like we have to be responsive all the time. But beyond just managing those external distractions, hyper-efficient also goes into the importance of, well, what would you call it, like internal focus, cultivating that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the keys there is intrinsic motivation. Finding that sense of, I don't know, purpose, enjoyment in the work itself. When you're intrinsically motivated, you're not just going through the motions, you're truly engaged.
You're describing those flow states, right? Where you get so absorbed in something,
Mhm.
time just flies by. We've all experienced that, whether it's, a hobby or work project. But how do we tap into that kind of effortless productivity more consistently? Is that even possible?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Hyperefficient has some pretty insightful answers. One of the key things is understanding that flow. You can't force it. It emerges when you hit that sweet spot where your skills match the challenge at hand perfectly.
So it's not just about finding tasks that are challenging enough. It's about finding tasks that, genuinely spark our interest.
Exactly. Think about those times when you've been completely absorbed in something, maybe a creative project, playing a sport, even a tough puzzle. You lose track of time because you're so engaged, right? That's the power of intrinsic motivation. And while we can't always choose our work tasks, there are ways to, shift our mindset, our approach to tap into that sense of intrinsic reward more often.
Okay, give us the goods. What are some practical ways we can cultivate intrinsic motivation, even in those less than ideal work situations.
One really powerful approach is to reframe tasks in terms of, learning and growth. Instead of just focusing on checking things off the list or meeting that deadline, ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I use this as an opportunity to develop a new skill or deepen my understanding?
So it's about shifting our focus from the outcome to the process. Instead of aiming for completion, we're aiming for growth.
Exactly. It's a subtle shift, but an important one. And it can make a huge difference in how we experience work. When we're focused on learning and growth, even those mundane tasks can become more engaging because, well, we see them as opportunities to develop.
I'm loving this reframing. Takes the pressure off of just constantly producing, lets us embrace the journey a bit more. But going back to those flow states, is there anything we can actually DO to create the conditions that make them more likely?
There is, and Dr. Storoni has some great tips. One of the biggest is creating that distraction-free environment. And this goes beyond, just turning off notifications. It's about finding a space where you can truly focus. Could be a quiet room, a cozy corner of your home, even a park bench, right? Minimize those external distractions so you can tune into that internal flow.
So it's like setting ourselves up for success, both mentally and physically. Makes sense. But let's be real. Even with the best intentions, there are going to be days when distractions are just unavoidable. Inboxes overflowing, deadlines looming, feels like you're constantly putting out fires. What do we do then?
Those days are bound to happen, unfortunately. But even in those situations, Hyperefficient encourages us to be proactive about, protecting our mental energy. And one of the key strategies is building in what Dr. Storoni calls charging station breaks throughout the day.
Charging station breaks.
Yeah.
Now that sounds interesting. Tell me more.
Think of them as mini retreats for your mind. Dedicated times, even just 5 or 10 minutes, where you step away from work and engage in something that truly recharges you.
So not just taking a break from work, but actively engaging in something that, replenishes our energy. What kind of activities are we talking about here?
Could be anything from meditation, deep breathing, to listening to music, reading a few pages of a book, spending time in nature, anything that helps you shift gears, de-stress, reconnect with those inner resources, like giving your brain a pit stop to refuel before getting back on the road.
Love that analogy. And it's a good reminder that self-care isn't selfish. It's essential if we want to be truly productive. But before we get too carried away with our charging station breaks, I want to address something we haven't really talked about. That pressure to be productive, to be constantly checking things off the to-do list. How do we reconcile that with this whole idea of working with our natural rhythms, prioritizing rest and restoration?
That's such a good question, and one that, a lot of people struggle with. We're so conditioned to think productivity equals busyness, equals constantly doing, doing, doing. But Hyperefficient offers a really interesting reframing of what productivity really means. It encourages us to shift our focus from task completion to learning progress.
Learning progress. So it's not just about how many things we check off the list. It's about what we're learning, how we're growing along the way.
Exactly. When we focus on learning progress, we become less, I don't know, obsessed with checking boxes, more attuned to the nuances of the work, more curious, more engaged, and ultimately more effective in the long run.
I love that. It takes the pressure off, lets us focus on the process of growing and developing.
And it ties in perfectly with that idea of intrinsic motivation. When we're driven by a desire to learn and grow, we tap into that energy and enthusiasm that fuels those flow states and keeps us going over the long haul.
This has been so insightful. We've covered so much ground, from the gear model to those strategic breaks, managing digital distractions, cultivating intrinsic motivation. But before we wrap things up, I want to make sure our listeners have some concrete steps they can actually take away. Can we recap some of those key takeaways from Hyperefficient?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I had to pick, one or two things that are really impactful and, surprisingly simple to implement, it'd be those strategic breaks. Don't feel guilty. Even a few minutes here and there can make a huge difference. Remember, it's about giving your brain a chance to reset, recharge, and that ultimately leads to better focus, better creativity over time.
It is funny, isn't it? How we think, more time at our desk equals more output. But this book really challenges that. It's about working smarter, not just harder.
Exactly. And along with those breaks, give that gear model a try. Start noticing, which gear you're in throughout the day. See if you can, I don't know, be more intentional about shifting gears to match the task.
So if you're feeling drained or stuck, maybe instead of pushing through, shift into gear one for a bit. Let the mind wander, see what connections emerge. And then when you need that focus, really buckle down, That's when you go into gear 2 mode.
Exactly. It's about becoming more aware of those natural rhythms, working with our brains, not against them.
This has been so eye-opening. I feel like, I don't know, I have a whole new way of thinking about my work, how to approach it all. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with, a bit of a challenge. It's from one of my favorite quotes in the book. It says, "Instead of imposing the rhythm of assembly line work on your brain, impose the rhythm of your brain on your work." What do you think Dr. Storoni means by that? And, how can our listeners actually put this into practice?
It's such a great quote. Really gets to the heart of it all, doesn't it? I think what she's saying is we've gotten so used to, fitting ourselves into these rigid structures, expectations, often at the expense of our own well-being, our own productivity, really. And this quote, it's like, a call to reclaim that. Tune into your own rhythms, your own needs, and design a way of working that actually supports you.
It's powerful, isn't it? So to our listeners, the challenge is start paying attention to those rhythms, those ebbs and flows. Experiment, see what works for you. Maybe it's scheduling those tough tasks for your peak energy times. Maybe it's building in those charging station breaks or just, giving yourself permission to take a walk when you need it. It's about finding what works and creating a workflow that really, supports your needs, your goals.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, it's a process. Don't be afraid to experiment, make adjustments, find what truly lets you thrive. Hyper-efficient gives you that roadmap, but, the journey is yours to create.
Such great advice. And on that note, a huge thank you to our fantastic expert, Professor Anna, for joining us on the Deep Dive.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Always great to, talk about these ideas, share them with such an engaged audience.
And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of, hyper-efficiency. Remember, it's not about pushing ourselves to the limit. It's about working smarter, finding a way to be productive that's, sustainable, enjoyable even. Until next time, keep diving deep.